Maris Sharon. I'm one of the chairs of Design Incubation, and I'm Director of Fellowships at Design Incubation. So I know I said hello to some of you already as you were joining the call, but this is an official welcome to everybody. Some people are still sort of working on joining, so I'm going to go through some of the just bookkeeping kind of stuff right here in the beginning. First of all, if you are not part of the panel, we are asking people to turn off both of their mic and their video to try and save bandwidth, because there's going to be somewhere around 40 or maybe more people on this call, and we want to, be able to keep the bandwidth low if possible. So good morning to those of you who are joining us from the West Coast. Good afternoon for those of you who are here on the East Coast like I am. And good evening to those of you who are joining from Europe, and I think almost late evening or in the middle of the night to those of you who are joining us from Asia. First of all, I'd like to just give a shout out and thank Lisa Hammersheim for agreeing to not only host today's event and be a panelist, but also run tech for it, because we were a little bit less familiar with the tech, and so she's donated her Zoom Professional Ultra account to make sure that we can hopefully stay with the bandwidth and get everybody on this call. So it is, for Design Incubation, it is our first time running a call with so many people, especially on an online situation as opposed to in person, so please be patient with us. So I'd just like to start by spending a moment talking about community and saying that I've just been really pleased and amazed at the kind of outpouring of support from people in the design educators community as we tackle and deal with sort of unprecedented challenges as educators. Lisa offered to host, and before that, Alex Gerard had the idea to do this event, and Dan was transitioning to teaching online for the first time and still ran all the media stuff for us and pushed out all the content, so you're able to be here today. So also thanks to our other DI chairs, Liz DeLuna and Robin Landa, who are on the call, for their support, and to Heather Quinn, who's not, I don't think, here today, but has been sending me lots of emails with lots of resources that we're hoping to be able to share out to all of you. So this call is going to be, for those of you who are maybe new to Design Incubation, this call is going to be about transitioning to teach online and working in a fully online environment, specifically for design and/or studio classes. That's going to be the focus of this call. Based on what we're hearing from our members, we're hearing that just organization around teaching online and pushing content online is one of the things people are interested in. Engagement and connection and trying to maintain that compared to a face-to-face environment is something we're going to be talking about today. Assessment and how that might be different in an online situation is another thing that we're going to discuss. And then maybe some tech thrown in, because I know we're all kind of techies, but we're also inundated by some of the new tools we've been using. So I'm going to jump right into the questions, and because our panelists have their whole bios online, I'm not going to go through that, but I am going to ask you, when I start by asking a question, to just remind us of where you teach and just give us a couple words about your experience teaching in fully online environment and or using some of these tools. So without any further ado, I am going to start with Lisa. And I know that you said up until a few weeks ago, you thought of yourself as like what you were doing was kind of an anomaly, that teaching fully online seemed to be this kind of tiny niche area, and all of a sudden, like, what you do is hugely in demand. Can you talk about asynchronistic versus synchronistic methods? Because that idea of whether or not you meet students in real time, I think, is something a lot of people are struggling with, and you've had experience not just doing it now, but in other, at other times as well. So can you talk about how you incorporate that in your classes?
Oh yeah, for sure. And just for a little kind of intro about me, I work with Independence University, which is a fully online vocational training college based in Salt Lake City. So yeah, like Eris was saying, up to this point, I kind of felt like what I was doing was very niche. Not too many people were that interested in it for, good reason, because studios are great. But then when things started transitioning, suddenly it was like, wow, everybody's coming over to my little world, and how can I hopefully do my part to make it a little bit more hospitable, because certainly it's a strange and wondrous land, I think, for many of you. But yeah, so regarding kind of synchronous versus asynchronous, just a little kind of definition of both of those. So synchronous is like what we're doing now, so kind of real time, real pace, that sort of thing. Whereas asynchronous is kind of at your own time, kind of traditional online learning type thing. So I feel like with synchronous, it's very important because it helps you kind of become a human with your students. So I feel like it's important to have kind of those connection points periodically. So, once a week, once every couple weeks, twice a week, just something to kind of keep that connection point of like, we're all in this together, we're here, we've got each other, we're still, we're still surviving, we're still making it, that sort of thing. But I will say that I think for the majority of the content, and probably kind of the primary stuff that you're working with in the day-to-day studio, I think it's almost better to say or to have it be asynchronous, mostly because just everybody's in different time zones now. People are working, people are taking care of other people, people are trying to manage just a lot of life and kind of a lot of just mental health in general. So if you have a lot of synchronous stuff, it's good, but it's also kind of limiting because it means that people have to be gathering together. Whereas if you have a lot of kind of async stuff, it can, just help kind of smooth out a little bit more of the rough edges that have to come with it. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Do Alex, Dennis, or Mitch, do you have any sort of differing perspectives on that, or different ways you've been thinking about whether or not to meet students in real time to kind of foster engagement, or allow them to interact with the content at their own pace?
I think for me, another key consideration when considering synchronous versus asynchronous is the student populations we're all serving. And I would imagine that there are people on this call that have very similar populations to me and others who have very different populations. Our university actually encouraged all faculty to go with an asynchronous approach because of concerns for our students having access to technology, reliable internet bandwidth, caring for others at their home, and also going into a home environment that they may not be comfortable projecting out into a classroom. So I think it's also important to be sensitive to who we're in front of when deciding how to engage.
Alex, can you just remind us where you teach in the population you serve?
I already screwed up, and it's only my first online one of these.
Okay.
My name is Alex Gerard, and I am a faculty at Southern Connecticut State University, where I'm the coordinator of the graphic design concentration, which we have housed in a studio art major, and I also serve as the director of peer review for design incubation.
Great. Dennis or Mitch?
So I'm Dennis Cheatham. I'm at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, Miami of Ohio. I'm graduate director of a distance learning MFA in experience design. We also have an undergraduate program in communication design. And I've found that that asynchronous, I want to echo Lisa and several others here, asynchronous is such a valuable way to operate critiques. Sometimes we can think it's less personal, but I have found that asynchronous, using a discussion or something like that, where learners post work, they post progress, and then others like do comments on that, so essentially critique on the work happening in a discussion forum. I found that works so well that learners who may be in the back of your studio and not comfortable speaking up sometimes can provide some really rich critique and feedback that you might not get face to face. And so actually there's a lot of upsides to it, not just technology, what we would call the last mile. Some of our students who don't have access to digital technology or to significant bandwidth. So serves them well, but also there's some pluses to it in getting some really rich feedback. Synchronous, I found, I'll use it as a special ingredient, not as my main course, let's say. I found that it's really helpful in Synchronous to have times where learners can stop by. We do a thing in our program called Open Studio, and it's scheduled a few times a week where learners can just drop in and they can discuss what they're doing on an assignment or show their work, but they can also just hang out and see each other. I got feedback from learners that they wanted some time to just see each other. We're already a distance learning program, so we don't get together very often, but they just wanted to know there's someone who's going to be there for me at that time. And Synchronous has been a great tool for that, but used as a special ingredient, not as the base instruction.
Great. Mitch, any thoughts on that, keeping that connectivity with students?
Yeah, I mean, so my name is Mitch Goldstein, and I teach, I'm an associate professor at Rochester Institute of Technology in upstate New York. And I am keeping all of my classes completely asynchronous with sort of optional, kind of like one-on-one chats with me as needed. And I fully agree with everybody else has said, but just to add one more sort of point, I think that there is some level of performance anxiety in a group crit, and I think it's like times 10 in a video group crit. I feel super awkward. I mean, I'm happy to see you all, but this is super awkward. Like, this is just weird, right? And so I think for some students who maybe, I mean, I have students who are literally in quarantine in China. I have students who have questionable internet in like Indonesia. I happen to have quite a few students who maybe have some social issues. I do think this presents sort of a slightly surreal environment. And so I think just to be sensitive to that, like I am more than happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk to me on video or phone or in like social, it doesn't really matter. But I do think we got to be really aware of sort of the abilities and the sort of kind of social reality of our kind of new world here.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I'm going to chime in because I have a little bit of a different experience from some of you. I've been teaching online, not exclusively sort of half-time or off and on since 2017. I teach at St. John's University. It is a population of undergrads. We are in Queens, New York, so it looks like Queens. It's very multicultural, very diverse. And my first experience teaching online, I tried some synchronistic opportunities, found no one wanted to talk to me, but this time around, I've talked about this with other people. We really have a kind of an unusual moment here because you've already established a connection with your students because you had them face-to-face for part of the time. So I decided it was pretty easy for me to transition to online because one of my classes is online already, and transitioning the other was pretty easy. So I did add a synchronistic element where we meet one day a week via WebEx, and WebEx is sort of like this, but is maybe a little bit less stable, which is why we're not using it today. But every one of my students has a login information for that because it comes with the Microsoft Office system, and we're a large university, so everybody has it. I have found that to be like unbelievably helpful for engagement in a way that I hadn't anticipated before doing, when I was just doing regular online. And in this moment, I've also found that my students, while they may be in a variety of different situations, they are kind of trapped there. And one of the challenges of getting students to engage online is that they're doing a lot of different stuff. And so I found in this case that my students are really happy to be able to have some time and be together. And we have critiques just like we would in class. It's buoyed by the fact that we've all, everybody knew each other for those 7 weeks before we got quarantined. So I also just wanted to shout out and see if Dan Wong would weigh in. He's a new instructor of online content, chair of DI, and I know that he expected the asynchronistic experience to be everything he was going to do, and then sort of switch to doing some synchronistic work and has been happy with that. Dan, are you able to turn on your video and tell us about that?
Sure. So I went in with a lot of trepidation.
You want to just, sorry, you want to tell us what you teach?
Oh,
It'll
sorry.
be helpful.
Again, one. I teach at New York City College of Technology, which is part of CUNY, and I focus largely on web and web design instruction, interactive instruction. I've got to say, I had not been using Blackboard at all. I've been teaching for 12 years now. I had not been using Blackboard at all because I've been using all the other tools that are available to us. You know, Google Drive, a little bit of Dropbox, but also my own websites and such. So I went in with a lot of trepidation because even though I had gone through online training, went through a workshop and created a syllabus, I had never actually taught using that. And then, so last Thursday was the first time that I used it. We're using primarily Blackboard. I'm not sure how many people have access to that. I've been talking a lot with Eris about this because it seems that Blackboard, depending on how your institution has purchased it, you may or may not have access to all of the features. I do a lot when I'm teaching. I do a lot of showing websites on the screen, running to a whiteboard or a Blackboard, kind of shooting from the hip and doing all kinds of notes, and then lecturing and interacting directly with the students. So I wasn't sure how I was going to do all of that in a Blackboard situation. I knew that asynchronous was going to take a lot of time in preparation because you have to create the content. And I was worried that synchronous teaching would be challenging because there would be so much interaction that I was afraid that the students would kind of get distracted, or if people are talking over each other, it becomes very distracting. So that being said, I've got to say I've taught 2 classes and it's gone really, really well. What I did was I interacted with the students and I said, I usually teach a 4-hour class, and I said, how are we going to do this? And I thought that 4 hours was going to be too much. So basically what I've done is I've broken it up into chunks. So I do a lecture for about an hour. I tape that lecture. I do some asynchronous taping of my lectures, which I would have done anyways, in terms of I would have lectured anyways. And then also in Blackboard, they have these features where you can separate teams out into groups and go into different meeting rooms. So I was able to easily do that. So they're breaking out into groups, they're talking amongst themselves and then coming back. And then they're sharing their own screens. So I've got to say, it's been a really wonderful experience. I've basically been able to do everything that I do in the classroom through Blackboard. And also my experience is that the students are really hungry for structure. And so they're all showing up on time. I've never seen my classrooms as full as they are from the start to the finish. And so I would say that's pretty fulfilling and successful as well.
Great, Dan. Thanks for sharing. Can you also just shout out how many countries and states and everything have registered so we know who's on the call?
Absolutely. So we've had, this number keeps on going up. 62 was the last check of people who registered for this event today. We've got people from, I think, 7 countries and 15 states. So I just want to give a shout out to everybody who has registered. I don't know if you're all here. We have Ireland, Scotland, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Spain, Italy, Canada. And then from the US, we have Massachusetts, Florida, California, Maryland, Michigan, Kansas, Nebraska, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Ohio, New Jersey, Illinois, Vermont, Virginia, Oregon, and Oklahoma. And I'm sorry if I've missed anybody. I know that there was actually a whole bunch of people who registered after I compiled this list. So welcome to you all as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So we talked a little bit about tech there. We kind of did a dive with Dan into tech, and I'm just wondering, for those of you who are teaching classes where it's about making the physical form still, Mitch, I know you do a lot of that. Like, what are you doing about just like a class, or I don't know if you're teaching that now, or you're just thinking about classes where we thought everybody was going to do giant prints or packaging or, you know, stuff like that?
You know, that's really a great question. My class right now, the ironic thing about my class, the class I teach right now is 2D Design 1 for normally for freshmen, but because of how our IT is structured, I actually have like sophomores through juniors. That's another conference call. But basically, my students already use Dropbox Paper in order to post work and kind of get feedback, even though we were doing it in the class. I think it's a really useful sort of platform. Back in the day, I would do this on Tumblr, which was an absolute nightmare. So it really works really well. And at the end of the day, the students can make anything they want in any medium they want, but ultimately it ends up as like a photo or you know, a PDF or something they throw up online. And I honestly don't think that's really a problem. I think that when you sort of extrapolate past the institute, past being in school, their portfolios are primarily going to live digitally. They're probably going to do much more emailing of stuff than they are going to be sort of physically handing people a, you know, a box of things. So I don't really have like a huge issue with it. I think it's fine. I think the students understand, you know, in 2020, this is kind of what this is now. It is a lot of sort of, you know, digital communication. And I encourage them to make whatever they want. And as long as they can grab a photo with, you know, their phone or whatever. I've had students do really interesting like video pieces because they knew it would sort of end its life as like this digital object. And so it's been no problem. It's really not been a huge problem at all.
Great. And have you had any issues with students who just don't have access to, say, a printer to even print something out and photograph it? I know I haven't, somebody who says that right now who hasn't been one of my strongest students, and I suggested he email it to me to just, and I could take a picture of it just having a really rough print, and he hasn't done that. So I'm not sure if that was really the primary issue in that particular case,
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering if you have any experience with, like, what if they don't have it at home?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I am in day 3 of our sort of new reality right now, so I don't really have an answer to that. I am waiting to hear from students, some of whom I've still not heard from yet, but we have been sort of told to kind of take it easy on them for the first week. Some of them are literally finding a place to live because campus is closing and stuff. So I will get back to you on that. I think that, you know, frankly, I think if students want to make an excuse, they're going to find a way to make an excuse. And there are students who are here to really do this, and there are students who are sort of tourists. And that's just kind of the reality of where we're at. So I hope I provide the students sort of an opportunity with lots of different ways to make things, get me things, talk about things, get feedback on things. And I am confident the vast majority, if not all of them, will do that.
Great. So I know you're not the only one using or who's used Dropbox Paper. Alex, you've been exploring that as well. And I just wonder if you could give us like a quick description of it, just because I know you did that because you had to do it for me because I didn't know what it was.
Yes. I've been a huge fan of Dropbox for at least, I think I started when I was in Santa Barbara in 2009. And then each time they roll out, some tools stick and some don't. But I've become a huge fan of paper. I like it. We are designers, so I think it is designed well. It looks nice. It creates an ecosystem that's visually appealing. Something I've been really thinking a lot about, and I actually wrote a curriculum grant last year because I've been thinking about how could we convert the critique experience to an online setting. There's been a push at our institution to start exploring this whole new online teaching thing. And then a year later, this happened. So I count myself lucky I was looking at it. And I did something similar to what Mitch described. When I was first testing it, I actually used it in face-to-face classes. I had students document, export their work to static images, uploaded those into a single sheet, being Dropbox. It's very drag and drop. And then all students were required to have a Dropbox account to be able to comment on them. Luckily, that's free. And then my favorite thing about Dropbox is it can do really targeted comments. You can drop a pin on an area of a layout or composition, and then the students can speak directly to that. And then my favorite thing about it was that it created this documentation of the critique, which allowed students to go back and reference. Something I'm sure we've all experienced is a very rich critique environment. And then the next classroom, minimal of what was discussed is actually embedded into the updated work. And now there's this transcript of the critique. And so I found, and I've actually started adopting it even in face-to-face classes, because it allows students to go back and reference what was said about their work. I do know on the chat feature of this dialogue, it was mentioned that Dropbox is blocked in certain countries. So obviously that is a limiting factor, but I've become a really big fan of it.
That's great. And is it available on the free version of Dropbox for students?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I had no
Okay.
problem with, I have a paid account just because I use it to house my entire design archive and portfolio. And since I was the one that initiated it, much like Lisa's doing for this, didn't have any problems with students having the free account. And we did it in class, and so we had about 20 active users all commenting on one Dropbox paper at once, and that seemed to work fine. So there weren't any issues in terms of that.
And just to add to what Alex was saying, and I fully agree with everything he said times 1,000, if your students use Google Apps for education, that login will generally get them into Dropbox. There's sort of some synthesis there. So our students use their sort of regular RIT credentials to create a Dropbox account. It's very, very seamless and no big deal.
Great. So you're saying that they can go through, if they're using Google Classroom as a free product, they might be able to go through that as a sort of a backdoor into Dropbox?
Yeah, Google Apps. So not necessarily Google Classroom, but if they're using Google Docs, Google Drive, etc., they can sign in with Google as an option, and you can use your sort of school credentials to get in.
That's
I mean,
great
I would test that.
information.
I would test that first, but for us, it works very easily.
We won't come back at you if it doesn't work for everybody. So thanks for the idea. Dennis, I just saw you nodding a lot, and you also like put something about clear expectation and number of comments and stuff into the chat. And so I know that you've been developing a fully online program from scratch. So can you talk about like some of those metrics around expectations and how sometimes in a classroom setting, we're able to kind of slide by with being vague about those because we can correct in real time. And if you do that in an online situation, you just end up with people not doing what you intended.
Right. I have found the value of learning outcomes and clearly written learning outcomes that are measurable and actionable actually creates an environment for learners where they know exactly what I am looking for. Exactly, like even I just have to remind them, it's like, okay, so when you're doing this project, go back to those learning outcomes. Are you hitting these? At what level is your work accomplishing these levels? Now, specific in discussions and critique, it's like, years and years ago, I'd use, participation grade, but I found that teaching online has made me far more articulate in what real participation is. Part of that is, and I usually use 3 learning outcomes for all of my critiques and discussions, and they're pretty basic. One of them is, are you applying the content that we are currently discussing in the course? So if they're doing a critique, I want them to bring up social cognitive theory, or I want them to bring up research methodology, or whatever we're dealing with at that time. I want them to talk about typographic history, whatever we're doing. Integrate that into your comments. I also have a learning outcome that talks about, did you do the number I asked for? I mean, pretty simple, right? And I specifically say, we need at least 3 comments per discussion. So on any one, you can do at least 3 comments total, but you gotta have those. If you do more and above and beyond, then I use a rubric to be exemplary. That's above and beyond. That's, more points, but it's very clear. I need the number that I'm assigning, and you've got to post those. And then the third learning outcome is the quality of that feedback. And the learning outcomes clearly says, I need to make sure that there's feedback that is both critical and praise, not just like, oh, it's really cool, I like it, that was nice, it was great. Like, I need critical, like, there's opportunities that you missed to do this, or I think you might want to examine. Really helpful comments. A fourth learning outcome, sometimes that matches a critique and sometimes it doesn't fit, is a learning outcome where I'm asking for learners to further the conversation, to further a discussion. Doesn't quite fit with a critique, but in more open discussions, a learning outcome that says, ask questions of others, ask probing questions, keep us rolling. And that way I can evaluate and give feedback if learners are just dead ending, like, this was cool, thanks. Or if they're saying, this was cool, have you thought about this? What did you mean? That keeps everything going and keeps that community tight. So learning outcomes that are actionable and clear allow me to be able to give feedback on how well they're growing as critiquers, as discussers, designers, but also they know exactly what I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Lisa, you've been at the, fully working in a fully remote online environment for a while now. And I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts about sort of the measurability and the difference? I know you said, for Lisa, I think teaching face-to-face is actually sort of receded in her mind because she's been doing it for so long. But do you have any thoughts, Lisa, about just what it means to evaluate and to have measurability and rubrics? I mean, this is all the really unsexy stuff of teaching. I feel like that gets kind of pushed to the side when we can teach face-to-face that really makes a difference in terms of outcomes in an online learning environment. And Lisa, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would echo what Dennis is saying. Rubrics are not exciting. They feel very limiting. You know, they're oftentimes based on math and percentages and all the things that I think traditionally as designers, and I'll just say myself, I hate that kind of like, I don't want to break down, you know, your creative process. Like, how can I judge that? You know, aren't you always iterating and thinking? And like, I don't want to hinder you with this, you know, objective that I'm putting on you. But really, like, if we think about it, you know, we all create best when we have some boundaries in place and when we know what expectations are going to be, and when we can kind of have that, you know, that as our guide rails essentially to kind of then go within there. So I feel like it's extremely important to be very clear about what it is that you're looking for. And I mean, if a student is wanting to go down their own creative pathway, like, that's totally fine. And you can work with them as the instructor, and, you know, you can come up with some really great stuff, you know, together within, you know, the rubrics and the learning outcomes and such. But if a student is like, I don't want these because I want to do my own thing, a lot of times I've seen that doing your own thing means doing nothing. And like, that's, you know, eventually going to be a problem sooner than later. So I feel like with our students and with the curriculum that I write for my own institution, it's at the first level, it's very boring because we do start with, you know, what will the assignment be? We build it backwards. So at the end of this, you should be able to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, so what are the steps that we will build into it to make sure you get there? And how you get there, you know, is totally up to you. You can, you know, use the software you want to, you can make whatever you want to, but it has to have evidence that you've done these certain things. So, and yeah, being as explicit as possible and probably reiterating it like at least 3 or 4 times, because what we all hear the first time is generally not quite what we should be hearing the first time. So it takes a little bit of repetition there as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to note that for those of you who are transitioning to teach online for the first time, you probably don't have the luxury of building something backwards. But I know that I have learned a tremendous amount about face-to-face teaching actually from teaching online, because it forced me to be explicit about things that I was less explicit about and sort of got away with in a face-to-face situation. Hopefully none of us will be in this situation for long enough that you all get to experience that long term, but it is something to think about, like, what about the online environment are you able to take back to that face-to-face environment, and you know, how the two inform each other. I would say for those of you who are feeling really overwhelmed by maybe just the nuts and bolts organization of putting content, I highly recommend doing a combination of synchronistic and asynchronistic, because that time you would have spent in the classroom anyway, if you spend that in a synchronistic situation with students on cams, you're able to mimic more of what they've had in terms of an experience with you as an instructor before this sort of sea change. and they don't have to like make a complete transition. Now, I know some institutions sort of push the asynchronistic experience, but I do think moving to that fully that way immediately on a week's notice does make things much more difficult than if you do the combination. As somebody who's done both and done both, you know, certainly done the asynchronistic for a couple years. Alex, I just wanted to jump in and, you know, have you just mentioned that assessment can be something beyond being graded. You're the first person who's ever made assessment fun for me. So could you just talk a little bit about other ways of thinking about assessment?
Yeah, well, I'll take that as quite the compliment if I was able to make assessment seem fun. I'm going to update my CV right now. But I sort of have my approach to assessment when I shifted from the non-academic setting to the academic setting is I quickly just acknowledged this is a necessary component of my job, and rather than take the typical approach, which is, you know, mash the teeth and dig in the heels, I just thought, okay, if I'm forced to do this, can I do it in a way that supports my own goals and agenda for the classroom? And so I've sort of started with assessment when I am building classrooms rather than having it be done something after the fact. And I found that it really forces me to think critically about what I'm hoping students are learning in my modules and projects and along the way. And I think that online learning is particularly suited to think of assessment in that way because I am someone in the face-to-face classroom is very fluid. I like to be responsive. I like to extend or contract a deadline as, you know, the culture of the class is coming through. And in the online environment, you really can't do that because you're having to map out so much further ahead. And some suggestions so that people don't drown themselves in assessment. Well, first, I think it's important to acknowledge this is not, and I appreciate from my institution, we're getting these messages from our administration that this is not a perfect situation. Do not set yourself up for the expectation that this is going to be a perfect online learning environment in a week. People spend careers and semesters building this. And I've been very open with my students about that I am responding on the fly so that they can still engage with curriculum and meet their graduation goals and their course goals. So I've been very open that there's going to be bumps. And I think the students have appreciated that. But what I have done with assessment to support my online classroom is I'm a big fan of mini assessments. So M-I-N-I, not many, M-A-N-Y, along the way. I think it can really reinforce behaviors and get students used to the environment. For example, my first project for all of my classes, I'm teaching our senior capstone class, and I'm also teaching sections of our Principles of Design course, is because we are an asynchronous class, I gave a lot of written information, and then their first assignment was a multiple choice test of details found within the written information. So what that forced them to do was to actually read the content I had delivered to them, but to get them navigating the Teams environment, because that's what we're using to structure our online classes at Southern. It's one of our options. The other is Blackboard, but I'm using Teams. And so that assessing their ability to navigate the environment required them to navigate and get comfortable with the environment and got them used to how they'd be engaging with me down the road. And then sort of a last tip to spare yourselves from overgrading and overassessing is be really focused and compartmentalized about your assessment, especially around benchmarks. So breaking down whatever your project is into small stages, and then the assessment of that stage can be very focused around one aspect. Is it around your planning? Is it around your color? Is it around whatever those parameters of the project might be? Focusing on something rather than trying to do everything at every stage.
That's great. Dennis, you had said something about experience points and risk points. Does that go back to what you were talking about earlier, or is that some new and wonderful thing that we are not yet familiar with?
Those are, so experience points is an add-on. It's an extended, I'll talk just briefly about it because I don't want to sidetrack us. It's not specific to online learning. But experience points were another points that could be earned by students that I want to challenge them to do this. So when they're working on a project, I want to give them freedom to explore areas that are new to them, or I want them to do their work in a way that's looking into content that's new, or if they're doing, especially doing field research, I don't want to get feedback like, so I interviewed my neighbor and I got all this great data. I'm like, you know your neighbor. Like, I want you to go experience new people, go to new contexts, explore new problems or people or content that you've never gotten into before. So experience points are a more complicated thing, but they're an add-on measure that tries to challenge learners and rewards them for exploring new content with their work or doing research that expands their previous understanding. Now with that, and these are our classrooms now, so it's not like we're doing a lot of field research unless it's 6 feet away, but still I'm finding learners are finding ways to get experience points by interviewing people they don't know or making deeper contacts and networks to gather that research to drive some of their design solutions. But experience points, risk bonus, I can talk about that some other time, but I think there are opportunities for us, even though our classrooms and learners in our classes, their studio is now their home, that we can give them permission to still engage with others through some of this technology and apply that in some of their work, or maybe explore content that it's still accessible. They can still get to unique concepts and content. They just have to be reminded, go out there and go find it. Maybe there's a designer you've never looked into or explored, maybe a period in history or a culture that you're interested in. Still go out there. Don't let these walls confine your thinking.
Great. That's helpful. I think, just challenging students to see beyond the walls of the room that they're in and now is even more important, because there are ways of doing that, as evidenced by the conversation that we're having right now with 40 other odd people. And the more, I've been trying to challenge them to say, like, this moment is going to pass, but some of this is going to continue into the situation that is your professional workplace, regardless of what happens in terms of headlines and world health, where, a lot of people are going to have experience working remotely. And so the more productive you can be in this situation and be able to talk about that in job situations in terms of looking for jobs in the future, the more likely you are to be successful in the new economy. And so I think that taking some moments to think also about how this prepares us for what is going to be sort of a changing future is also a great moment to spend with students. Lisa, you've been doing this for a while, and I have a two-part question. First, I know there's some faculty who are teaching courses that they just never would have imagined being put online. So my sort of part one of the question is, having done this for a long time, do you still see that there's courses that are better suited to work in an online environment than others, A? And then B, are there tools, whether they're tech tools or other tools, that you would suggest that those of us who are starting out doing this look into, whether they're built into what's part of your institution or elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I almost feel like I'm probably a little bit biased in saying, like, I think you probably could teach all things design online if you find a creative enough way to do it. And I will say that I'm very excited from what's going to come out after all of this, settles down, because, like, I have a friend whose daughter is now taking dance class online, and, like, my nephew is going to soccer practice on Zoom. And so, like, we're becoming very creative, I think, with how we leverage all these different tools. And I don't think anything is a replacement, and I don't think it's ideal. And, even though I love online, I think there is magic in being in a physical place with a community of people. And, like, there's something that you're just never going to replicate, in an online space when you don't have that presence. But just the ways you can use these tools and kind of the creativity that you can embed in, if you start not thinking about how can I replace, but how can I use what I have now to do something that's different, but to do something that's, perhaps as effective, just in a different way, I think could open up a lot of new possibilities. So I think it's an interesting question. And I think, should everybody go online? No. Like, should all classes always be online? No. But, you know, could they be if you think in different ways? I think you definitely could, you know, come up with some new stuff there. And as far as tools, I mean, I will say our institution uses Canvas. And so that is kind of my primary. Canvas and Zoom is how I do most everything with my students, mostly because it's what they're familiar with. So I feel like with tools and technology, it's very, there's a lot out there. There's a lot of good free stuff and such. But you have to be very careful that you're orienting your students appropriately so that they don't have to figure out a whole nother tool. And, you know, there's anxiety in learning anyways. And so you don't want to add, you know, like, okay, now we're all going to be on Slack. Now we're all going to do this other thing. Now we're all going to, you know, get messages through, you know, Teams or, you know, kind of just adding on things. So, I mean, I feel like with tools, always just, you know, assess your students and err on the side of less, just because everybody is, you know, bombarded with everything. So yeah, I'm curious what the other panelists are thinking, because I think they have good perspectives as well with the transition. So
yeah, that's a great point about using what students have kind of built into the fabric of what the university already offers. I will just say that if you watched any of my videos on our YouTube channel, shout out, then you'll know that I use Blackboard, and I spent 10 years avoiding Blackboard, hating Blackboard, talking down at Blackboard. And then from my videos, you'd probably think, oh, she drank that Kool-Aid somewhere along the way. But the reality is that when I started moving online, I found that my students were already there. I teach at a large university, and they were already there because they were there for their other classes, primarily for their core classes. And so just the easiest point of connection was Blackboard. And I started using Blackboard for assignments. And so it could be Blackboard, Canvas, whatever, D2 Learning, whatever it is, it's like pushing out and push notifications for assignments just meant that I had students turning in more assignments. And so I was like, okay, I still hate the Blackboard interface. There's a lot of things that I still complain about, but it was just a more successful point of entry for my students because they already had that. They in some ways, they were the Blackboard experts and I had to catch up. The other thing I'm a huge advocate for is Voicethread. It's bundled into, I think it's bundled into some versions of Canvas and D2 Learning. It's definitely bundled into some versions of Blackboard. What we're learning from talking to faculty is it's kind of like a menu, and your institution can have Canvas or Blackboard, but pick different features. So in my case, Voicethread has been amazing, and it's one of the things I've actually brought back into my face-to-face classes. It allows students to upload images, PDFs, videos, and audio files, and then for other students to comment on those using audio or video features. And as you guys were talking about rubrics and sort of the idea of students commenting on each other's work, for me, is not about the student commenting on the other person's work. It's actually about that student then incorporating that feedback back into the work as they're improving it. That's how I measure my own, success in terms of an assignment. And I found that as soon as I went to the audio feature, I just had this huge jump in terms of students incorporating that feedback into their work as they were making revisions. And they were actually like referencing back in their audio recordings. They were referencing back, such and such said this, such and such said that, in a way that frankly, I spent like a decade like doing all this writing of comments. And I feel like, the great students were reading my comments. The middle students read some of my comments. And then there was a group of students who I was pretty sure never read one of the comments I made. So that's like, if I have one tech plug, it's, using an audio feature has been just life-changing in terms of students and their ability to understand the feedback and then internalize the feedback and make the changes in their work. So on that, Dennis, you've been transitioning to like a fully online program. Are there any other tools we should know about?
So I am So we have like early adopters, right? And then you have like lunatic fringe. And I've always been one of the lunatic fringe, but I appreciate your advice, and I think it's so important for everyone to hear. Don't do every tool everywhere. Lisa, your advice. I mean, like, I think I love adopting tools and trying them out, but keeping them simple is so important. And Eris, kind of as you mentioned, learners are already on Canvas or Blackboard or whatever these tools are, and so go where learners already go. Now, what have I integrated? So I am a front-end, back-end developer, so I've done a lot of HTML and hacking to get templates built for Canvas that are responsive. They work on mobile devices. They look really, really good because they got to, right? We're designers. But they also can be translated into any language. They can be read by screen readers. So using the tools we have, build what you build so it works. Other tools I've used, though, I do use Slack. Now, and several in the chat have been talking about Slack. I use Slack as a different kind of tool, and I use it only for our grad students. And it's really a place where all learners across the program can get in touch with each other, and especially for functions like advising. Because advising is not just class-centric. It does spread an entire program, and I found that's been a good tool. There are many tools like it that would work just as well. But I have found that tool works nicely for a different kind of function that is not a classroom function. So I think that'd be something important for participants here, that if there's a function that learners, you're trying to figure out a way to get in touch with them that's not a classroom function, another tool like Slack or something else might work effectively. Though there is a little bit of a learning curve for Slack. Not everybody's in it, but it's pretty consistent and pretty normal in most design agencies. But really go where learners have already gone, use the tools they use if you can. Just for production and video like this, so I hosted a podcast for like 2 years, and I'm so glad now that I'm like, oh, I've done some video or audio production. There's a tool called Screen Capture. Screencast-O-Matic is free. There's many other tools that are free. Video capture to record your lectures. Not going to go deep into that. There's one tool called Snagit, which is, I believe, made by TechSmith. It is a great tool for recording video and switching back and forth to what you're saying and then also what you're seeing on your screen. So when I do feedback for learners, a lot of my feedback is video feedback, which learners have shared they appreciate. And I try and go back and forth from their work to my face and their work to my face. They don't want to hear me talk all the time, and they don't want to look at my mug. I want to go back and forth and point out areas in their work or highlight things. What I'm trying to do is simulate as best as possible. If we're looking at the same wall together, so I can say, I can talk with them, I can look at their work, I can talk back with them again, like it's a conversation. I found that Snagit and some other tools to do that have been really great. That's not a classroom function, but it's totally on your computer to be able to facilitate that kind of connection. It spits out an MP4 file, then you can upload it and share it with learners. It's a pretty flexible tool. But again, I think some of the best advice we've heard today is stay simple on the tools, go where learners already are, but there are a few that I've found like these that have helped.
That's great. I can say that this whole conversation is just totally worth it for me right there, because I've been just doing screen capture on my computer with QuickTime, and it's like kind of clunky. So this seems like, just right there, it's going to improve my grading experience hugely. I have a question for you, Mitch, and again, it's like a two-part question. First of all, I know that RIT has a sizable graphic design program. There's also quite a few full-time faculty with some ideas around having people who are in the same section of a class or in different sections of the same class have the same learning outcomes. And I'm just wondering, given your situation at RIT, I know you said you're only like 3 days in, but has that presented any particular challenges that you might be willing to share with us? Because there's obviously other faculty in that situation. And then I'm also just my part two is tagging on the tech question. If there's any tools or tech that you recommend as another podcaster and now online instructor.
Yeah, those are great questions. And I will take your second part first, if I may. I would suggest everybody not really give as many shits as we are giving about the tech. I think, quite honestly, unless you are teaching learning technology class, that is not what we're doing here. And so I think this conversation is amazing and it's wonderful. But the idea here is to get the students to have something of a kind of reasonable experience for a really awkward and strange situation. So I love that we're having this chat, but I would just encourage you all to kind of, whatever's working is good. Like, you don't need to learn the world right now. It's not what this is about. And I want to, again, remind you that at least at RIT, we have an enormous deaf population and hard of hearing. We have the second biggest deaf and hard of hearing population in the country after Gallaudet in Washington, DC. And so stuff like doing voice chat is quite simply either not possible or becomes 10 times more difficult. We have to have an interpreter. There's certain times. It just becomes really challenging. So I think you want to be sort of as inclusive and what I would say is as low friction as possible. And again, if we were spending a normal amount of time on this, like a year, this would be super cool and we could do lots of stuff. But I think in this reality, we've got to just not get kind of fetishizing the tech. So to answer your first part of your question, we actually, RIT, when this thing hit, we were on spring break. And so I'm getting confused with like when quarantines were, but we were sort of in it in the middle of spring break. And RIT basically said, okay, we're gonna, go online. We're gonna give you an extra week of spring break to figure out how to do this. And I gotta tell you, I was on maybe 24 video calls over that week. Like, we busted our ass to make this happen. And it was kind of wonderful. And we all came together, and everybody is teaching very individually and very differently, but we're all hitting the goals together. We're all kind of agreeing as a team what does and does not need to happen. And it's been really, I mean, this situation is an absolute nightmare, but it's kind of been great to come together in that way. I wish it wasn't a pandemic that made it happen, but it was sort of a nice thing. So to answer your question, Harris, it's not a problem at all. Like, we have been really good, and I think we're all on board and we're helping each other out. We've sort of added each other to each other's classes to kind of back ourselves up if somebody gets sick. It's really been great. I mean, I would almost say it's heartwarming, which is a little cheesy, but it's really been kind of wonderful.
That's wonderful to hear. And it's interesting how, like, just that adversity makes us come together, and then also kind of forget some of the other things that we, suddenly, like, my book project or the big thing I was working on takes a backseat, and we're all kind of working on this together, right? So it also gives us a moment to think about these things. Alex, you're in a really different situation. You're the only full-time faculty for how many students? Like, a lot of students. And I'm just wondering, how has that been? And not only full-time faculty member in your department, but for graphic design, how have you felt? Is it the same as Mitch, or has it been a little bit different for you?
Well, it has stretched my cheeks out a bit, the fire hose in my mouth. But other than that, we're rolling with the punches. Little context, so I'm at, as I mentioned, Southern Connecticut State University. I'm the only full-time faculty member in the graphic design concentration, which we hover around 70 or 80 majors. And then we have, I have about 20 more minors, and we also have a large interdisciplinary program where they can focus on graphic design. So something, as soon as our classes started up again on Monday, so my focus to that point was converting courses, and now I am grappling with how to do online and virtual advising to that very large population. So if there's anyone in a similar situation, it might be interesting to come together. So feel free to put your name in the chat. It might be good to do that. What we did at our institution, we have a faculty advising model. So the faculty member in your degree is the person who is your advisor after your first year. And then we reinforce that behavior by having a pin come with that advising meeting, which happens at midterms. Our university has lifted the pin requirement for registration for fall 2020, but we are still going to have to make sure our students are well informed and able to take appropriate action to meet their graduation goals. So for me, solving this, it's still a bit of a work in progress, but I'm really trying to strategize structuring information so that students can be more informed when they're reaching out to me on where they're going within their degree. I know that's kind of vague and cryptic, but I'm still figuring it out.
Hey, when there's only one of you, I think we can all understand. We're all figuring it out when there's several of us working on this. So,
it's very easy to do area policy votes when you are a one-person area. So I know that we will be 100% on board with any decisions that are made.
Yes, you don't have to worry about those other faculty outvoting you, right?
That's true.
Great. So we're actually, just about at the end of our time because we don't want to go too much over an hour. But I'm just wondering, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to just share some last thoughts, maybe things that I didn't get to or that you think I should have gotten to, you think people should know. Does anyone want to just start out with that?
Okay, I'll start.
Yeah.
I think my big thought is that, the people who teach sort of design and design education in the world is very small. It's not a whole lot of people. And I think because the internet is basically everywhere, you have a community sort of waiting to happen. And so, I spent the first week of this thing kind of online, just constantly talking and DMing and posting stuff. And really, I think the community is here. And I don't want to speak for everybody else, but you are welcome to find me anytime you want, any way you want. And I believe most of us would say the same thing. So I think that we have got a really tight-knit community here of educators, and I would use that community. Like, I'm home. I have no place to be. So I imagine we're all pretty much the same way. So I think it's really a wonderful chance to sort of kind of cross-contaminate ideas with each other.
Yeah, that's a great point. And to that end, if you weren't reading the chat to all of the participants, I did ask people to put ideas, references, shout outs into the chat for ideas for additional programming or questions you'd love to see us just tackle in the future. So please add to the chat. Somebody else want to jump in?
I think that something I'm excited about, and like Mitch said, I hate that this has come about from a pandemic, but I think that there's a really great opportunity for design educators to show how they can be responsive and how they can structure curriculum. And I think that this could be a great moment for the design community and design educators to help lead the academic environments rather than, I feel, especially as a junior faculty member navigating tenure, a lot of us are being pushed to make our work look like something else, whether it's a paper or a journal, but this might be a great way for new research to emerge and new models to present research to emerge. So I'm very excited about that.
So Alex, we're going to stay tuned to you for more ideas and help for how to do that through DI.
Yeah, so once I solve advising, and then I will move on to that.
Excellent, you heard it here. Lisa or Dennis?
Yeah, I guess I can go too. I think I would, echo what both Mitch and Alex are saying. I think the most important thing is as soon as you start feeling too overwhelmed, like reach out to other people, take a walk if you live in an area where that's still safe to do. Don't forget that the ways that you're teaching are probably going to change, but your students and yourself. And so those things are not going to change. So kind of it's tempting to get overwhelmed, but always kind of cycle back to, okay, I am a human, the student, my learner on the other side, they are still humans too. Like, how can we do this together? How can we get through it? And I think it will be exciting to see how online learning can shift now that design educators are starting to get into the streams as well. And I think that there is a lot of potential for some very interesting things to come out of this. So.
Great, yeah, Lisa, we'll be staying tuned for more updates and ideas from you as a longtime online educator. Dennis, you're up.
So I'm in a unique spot because I teach in a program that is already doing this before we have all had to shift. But it also means that while the aircraft has been flying, all of the masks have fallen down out of the aircraft, and I'm helping everyone put them on in our division. So here at our university, so I'm doing a lot of this work with others who have had to do this conversion, have had to pivot, which I can't imagine doing. And maybe the best advice I've given those who are going through this, first off, is what we're creating online is just a home base for learners, a virtual studio that they can come to and know this is where my instructor is, where the information about what I'm doing what is expected of me is, and this is where I can find what I need. That goes a long way, and it does not have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be high tech, and I'm so glad that several mentioned that. It does not have to be all the bells and whistles because we're pivoting so quickly. Creating that home and being available as an educator and as a person who's also quarantined, I have found means so much to learners because they feel connected to us as people who are in the same spot, and they also know we care about them and want to create a place for them where they know that's home. Just doing that, no matter how fancy or well designed, I think is most of what we're shooting for. And it's been really just inspiring to see how that's been done across the country and across the world.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis, and thanks to all of you. I mean, one of the things that I think about when I hear all of you is that, you know, those of us who are panelists on the call are in a slightly privileged position because we have some experience doing the online learning before the sky fell. And I do want to just acknowledge that are some, you know, many of us on this call are in really privileged positions in terms of access to technology. And even though we may feel like our support from our institution hasn't been great, comparative support from our institution. And so, you know, I saw somebody in the chat say, like, my students only have cell phones. Like, there are some, you know, really significant challenges out there that we have to acknowledge. One of the things, though, I think that I've heard from everybody who is teaching online for the first time is that when they were able, you know, there was a lot of trepidation in many schools like Mitch's at RIT. They gave everybody an extra week. They gave us an extra day or two, and that was it. So I didn't have that buffer zone. None of us had that buffer zone. But, you know, every time somebody actually starts the process, students are so happy to have that engagement. And I would also say that as this is certainly a terrible situation, you know, those of us who are in New York are really pretty close to the epicenter of what it looks like is going to be the US epicenter for what's happening. You know, it is a moment in time. Nothing lasts forever. And so I do think everybody should also give themselves a break. Like, you don't have to be perfect. If you can continue that connection with students, if you can find a way for them even to be engaging just in their world around them and documenting what's happening or reflecting on what's happening, whether fully formed design work gets done for the next 5 or 6 weeks is kind of a drop in the bucket in terms of the long term. And you'll be able to pick that up again with students, even if you're not able to fully engage with them in the next few weeks, you'll be able to pick that up again in the future. And by having that contact, even if it's, you know, cell phone contact or just some emails with some projects to work on, that will make them feel still grounded within your institution and in the university and in the world of design, right? I think Mitch made a great point about how this is a small community and we want to keep it as a community, and the students are, whether they're educators or not, they're entering into that family of designers worldwide. So just a couple last notes. Design incubation, we're trying, you know, in between teaching online and doing all the things we have to do at home, we're trying to figure out how to move some of the content that we normally deliver face-to-face into an online situation, the same way all of you are being challenged to do that in your classes. So ideas are always helpful. We're going to try to run a colloquium online, or maybe doing it as a video, we're going to see, but please stay tuned for upcoming events. This was so successful, we might do another of those if people are willing to sign up. So, you know, we hope that you stay engaged with design incubation and with the design community in general as we move through the next few weeks. So, you know, I think that's all that we have time for today, but I want to thank all of our panelists, Dennis, Lisa, Alex, and Mitch, and all of you for tuning in. Thank you so much. And we hope to see you at another event in the future soon.